I used to believe that love could heal anything, that patience, kindness, and loyalty were enough to keep two hearts bound together through every storm. I was wrong. Sometimes, love becomes the very storm that tears everything apart. My name is Isla, and this is the story of how I lost everything I thought I needed, only to realize I was meant to rise from the ashes of what broke me. It all began 3 years ago, when I met Jackson, a man whose charm could make even the coldest heart thaw. He wasn't just handsome, he was magnetic. The kind of man who carried confidence in his walk, with eyes that seemed to promise a future painted in gold. He worked at an architecture firm downtown, and I met him at a charity gala where he offered me a glass of champagne with a smile that could have disarmed an army. From that night onward, we were inseparable. We talked about dreams, fears, and our plans for the future. Everything felt genuine, pure, and unstoppable. He made me believe that I was enough, that together we could conquer anything. But I should have known, things that burn too bright often burn out just as fast. Our love was a whirlwind. Within a year, we moved into a small apartment overlooking the city. I remember standing on the balcony one evening, wrapped in his jacket, feeling like the world was ours. He kissed my forehead and said, "You and me, Isla, we're unstoppable." I believed him with every piece of my heart. We spent nights dreaming about buying a house, starting a business together, maybe even having a family someday. Jackson had a vision. He wanted to design and own his own architectural firm. I wanted to support him no matter what it took. I worked 2 jobs just to help with the rent and his small business expenses when he first decided to go independent. I believed in him even when he doubted himself. And for a while, it seemed worth it. His business started gaining clients and he became busier than ever. But slowly our story began to change. He became distant, distracted. His phone calls went unanswered, his messages turned brief, and the warmth in his eyes started to fade into something unfamiliar. I tried to convince myself that he was just stressed, that success came with sacrifice. But deep down, I could feel it. The shift, the silence, the growing space between us. Then came the day everything changed. I was at his office bringing him lunch because I knew he'd skipped breakfast again. As I opened the door, I saw a woman sitting on his desk, laughing, touching his hand in a way no colleague ever should. Her name was Lydia, his new assistant, younger, beautiful, and full of that naive energy that once made me irresistible to him. When she saw me, she froze, her laughter dying instantly. Jackson looked like a man caught between lies, but instead of guilt, I saw irritation in his eyes, like I had interrupted something important. I stood there holding a paper bag full of his favorite food, feeling like a stranger in my own story. He said, "Isla, you shouldn't have come without calling first." That sentence broke something in me. I placed the food on his desk and left without a word. That night, I waited for him to come home and explain. He didn't. He came back past midnight, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine, his eyes avoiding mine as he mumbled something about a late meeting. It wasn't the lie that hurt, it was the ease with which he said it. The man who once couldn't bear to see me sad now didn't even notice the tears slipping down my face. Over the next few weeks, his behavior became unbearable. He stopped asking how my day was, stopped touching me, stopped caring. He'd leave early, come back late, and whenever I asked what was happening, he'd say, "Don't make everything about you, Isla." Those words echoed in my mind for nights. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I started doubting myself, wondering if I'd done something wrong, if maybe I wasn't enough anymore. And yet I kept loving him, hoping he'd come back to me. Until the day he told me he needed space. "You're too emotional," he said. "I need to focus on work and you're becoming a distraction." It was like someone had ripped my heart out and crushed it under their heel. I moved out that week, leaving behind the apartment we'd built together. The walls that still whispered our laughter, the couch that had once been our safe place, and the balcony where we had promised forever. I left him to his ambition, his success, and his new life, while I tried to rebuild what was left of mine. But life has a strange way of rewriting the story when you least expect it. 6 months after our breakup, I started a small interior design business from my friend's garage. I poured my pain into my work, designing spaces that made people feel what I no longer could: warmth, comfort, belonging. Slowly, I started getting clients, one recommendation leading to another. And then, by pure coincidence or perhaps fate, one of my biggest projects came from a luxury construction firm, the same one that had just partnered with Jackson's company. I didn't know it at first, but when I walked into that meeting room and saw his name on the presentation board, something inside me shifted. The pain that had once drowned me began to harden into something sharper, colder. Resolve. I smiled politely as the project manager introduced me to the team. And when Jackson walked in, looking every bit the successful man he always wanted to be, our eyes met for the first time in months. He looked surprised, maybe even nervous. But I felt nothing, just calm determination. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one chasing. I was about to show him what it truly meant to lose everything he took for granted. The moment Jackson's eyes met mine in that glass-walled boardroom, time felt suspended, like the universe had drawn a quiet breath between us. The man I once loved, the man I had built my world around, now stood across the table wearing an expensive suit and a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. For a second, I saw the flicker of realization in his expression, maybe guilt, maybe fear. But it vanished as quickly as it came. He extended his hand and said, "Isla, it's been a while." His voice carried that same confident smoothness I used to adore. But now, it only reminded me of every sleepless night I spent wondering why I wasn't enough. I shook his hand with a calm smile. "It has," I replied, my voice steady, composed. The voice of a woman who had learned how to bury her pain beneath elegance. The meeting went on, and I spoke professionally, discussing design layouts, budget constraints, and creative direction. Every word I said was measured, deliberate, and laced with quiet control. I could feel his eyes on me from time to time, studying me as though trying to decode the new woman I had become. When the meeting ended, he lingered behind while everyone else left. "You look different," he said, his tone almost uncertain. I smiled faintly, gathering my files. "Different can be good," I said, and walked away before he could reply. That night, I sat in my studio, staring at my sketches, my hands trembling slightly. It wasn't love I felt anymore. It was something else, something steadier, sharper. Seeing Jackson again had unearthed memories I thought I had buried, but it also reminded me of everything I had survived. He hadn't destroyed me. He had unknowingly created someone far stronger. Over the next few weeks, our paths kept crossing through work. Meetings, site visits, planning sessions. Fate seemed almost amused, forcing us to share space after so much history. But now I noticed things I hadn't before. The confident man who once lit up every room now carried subtle cracks in his armor. His laughter was forced, his temper short, and his eyes, those proud, stormy eyes, were tired. Lydia was often there too, standing beside him with her perfectly styled hair and a new diamond ring glinting on her finger. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. He had traded stability for excitement, and now that excitement seemed to be dimming under the weight of real life. I caught her glaring at me during one of the meetings, as if sensing the history between us. She leaned close to Jackson once and whispered something that made him shift uncomfortably. It was clear their fairy tale was cracking. One afternoon, after a particularly tense design discussion, Jackson approached me in the parking lot. "Isla, can we talk?" he asked, his tone softer than I expected. I turned to face him, sunlight glinting off the car mirrors around us. "About what?" "The project? Because if it's personal, that's not part of our contract." He hesitated, exhaling as if searching for the right words. "You don't have to be so cold. I'm just trying to talk." I laughed quietly, a sound that carried more strength than humor. "You lost the right to talk to me like that the day you chose someone else." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Things aren't what you think," he muttered. I raised an eyebrow. "Then what are they, Jackson?" "Because from where I'm standing, they look exactly like what they were. Choices. He didn't respond. I walked away, my heels clicking against the pavement, every step a declaration that I no longer belonged to his world. That night, he texted me, "I'm sorry for how things ended." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. No response. No closure. Just silence, the same kind he had once given me. But I wasn't interested in his apologies anymore. I was focused on my work, my growth, and my peace. Still, life has a way of testing resolve. 2 weeks later, the project hit a snag, one that required an emergency redesign, and guess who was assigned to collaborate closely? Me and Jackson. For days, we worked late into the evenings, side by side, but worlds apart. Our conversations were clipped, professional, distant. But sometimes I'd catch him watching me with a look that was neither anger nor affection, something in between, like regret. One night, as I was finalizing a layout, he said quietly, "You've changed, Isla. You're stronger now." I didn't look up from my laptop. "No, Jackson, I was always strong. You just never noticed." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with words unsaid and wounds unhealed. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread within the company. Lydia was said to be insecure, paranoid about Jackson's old flame being around. Their arguments had become public, whispers, shouting behind office doors, even one incident where Lydia stormed out of a client dinner in tears. I stayed out of it, maintaining my professionalism, but inside I couldn't help feeling a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. Not because she was suffering, but because Jackson was finally facing the chaos he once left me to drown in. It was poetic in a way. One afternoon, while reviewing blueprints, I overheard 2 employees talking quietly. "Did you hear? Jackson's firm is in financial trouble. They overextended on that luxury project." My pen froze mid-line, so the cracks were deeper than I thought. That night, I received another message from him. "Could we talk over coffee?" "Please." This time I didn't delete it. I just stared at it for a long moment, then typed back one word. "Tomorrow." The next day, we met at a small cafe downtown, the same one where we used to sit years ago, back when love was simple and full of dreams. He looked tired, his once perfect posture slumped, his suit slightly wrinkled. "You look well," he said, his voice quieter now. "Better than before?" I smiled faintly. "I am." He hesitated before saying, "I made a lot of mistakes. I thought I wanted something different. Someone different. But I lost more than I gained." I let him speak, sipping my coffee as he confessed his regrets. About Lydia, about his company, about everything. "I didn't realize what I had until it was gone," he said finally. I met his eyes and said calmly, "You didn't lose me, Jackson. You gave me away." His expression faltered, pain flickering across his face. But I didn't let it affect me. I had cried enough for him. Now, he could sit in the silence he once left me in. As I walked out of that cafe, I felt lighter. Not because he apologized, but because I no longer needed anything from him. No validation, no closure, no love. I had already built something far more valuable myself. What Jackson didn't know, however, was that this was only the beginning. His empire was crumbling, his relationships falling apart, and fate had just handed me the opportunity to stand exactly where he once stood, in control of everything he had taken for granted. And I intended to take it all back, piece by piece. The days following that meeting felt strangely quiet, yet every silence carried a pulse of anticipation. I returned to work as though nothing had happened, keeping my emotions locked away like precious secrets. But deep down, a plan had begun to form, not one born out of anger, but out of clarity. I wasn't seeking destruction. I was seeking balance. Jackson had taken my love, my confidence, my peace, and used them to build his success. Now I would reclaim everything, not by stooping to his level, but by rising above it. A week later, the company announced a major partnership proposal, a high-profile merger that could either save Jackson's firm or completely bury it. Coincidentally, the creative consultancy leading the presentation was mine. I had been working quietly behind the scenes, unaware that fate was scripting a poetic twist. When the list of lead designers was revealed, I saw his company name appear beneath mine. For a moment, I laughed to myself, not because it was funny, but because of how life has a way of returning unfinished lessons. I knew this was my moment. The moment I would take back the power he once stripped from me. In the following weeks, our teams collaborated under intense pressure. Every presentation, every concept meeting, every creative pitch was a stage, and I performed flawlessly. My ideas outshone his firm's, my designs more elegant, my strategies more precise. Jackson watched helplessly as I outmaneuvered him in every decision. But instead of gloating, I maintained composure, calm, kind, unshakable. He tried to re-establish old familiarity, but I gave him nothing beyond professionalism. It wasn't indifference, it was control. One evening, as we wrapped up a late session, he approached me again, his tone strained. "Isla, I can't keep pretending this doesn't affect me. I can't work like this, watching you succeed where I failed." I looked at him steadily, my voice soft but firm. "You built your world on my silence, Jackson. Now you're watching me build mine on your noise." He exhaled slowly, eyes clouded with regret, but I walked past him, the sound of my heels echoing through the empty hallway like punctuation marks to a story that was no longer his to write. Behind the scenes, I learned more about his troubles. His company had been over-leveraged, and Lydia's obsession with maintaining appearances only made things worse. She spent lavishly, hosted unnecessary events, and pressured him to keep up the illusion of success. They were both drowning, clinging to each other out of fear rather than love. It would have been easy to feel sorry for him, but pity was a luxury I no longer afforded. Instead, I focused on my craft, on my growing reputation. The more I succeeded, the more his downfall seemed inevitable. But I didn't rush it. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about dramatic explosions. It was about quiet reclamation, the steady unraveling of false power. Still, part of me couldn't deny the poetic satisfaction in watching him stumble over his own arrogance. Each time he tried to assert control, his plans backfired. Each time he attempted to charm clients, they deferred to me. He once told me that confidence was power. Now, I embodied that truth better than he ever could. Then came the breaking point. During the final proposal meeting for the merger, I presented my design strategy, a blend of innovation and emotional storytelling that captured the entire room's attention. The executives were visibly impressed, nodding, asking questions, leaning forward with genuine interest. Jackson's presentation followed, but it lacked heart. It felt recycled, mechanical, uninspired. When the lead investor finally spoke, his words were simple, yet devastating. "Ms. Isla, your vision is what we've been looking for. We'll move forward with your firm." The room erupted in polite applause, but I could feel Jackson's silence like a storm behind me. He didn't even look up as I thanked the board and closed my folder. That moment wasn't triumph, it was closure. I had reclaimed not just my career, but my dignity. I didn't need to destroy him. He had done that himself. When the meeting ended, he stayed behind, staring at the empty chairs. I walked past him, paused briefly, and said, "This isn't revenge, Jackson, it's just balance." Then I left the room, leaving him to face the hollow echo of his own choices. Over the next few months, the ripple effects of that decision spread fast. My company flourished, receiving new contracts, media attention, and industry recognition. Jackson's firm, meanwhile, began to crumble. Clients withdrew, investors lost faith, and rumors of internal conflict surfaced everywhere. Lydia was seen less and less by his side, and when she finally left, reportedly taking whatever remained of his savings, no one was surprised. I didn't celebrate his downfall publicly. I didn't need to. My success spoke louder than any words could. But what surprised me most was the unexpected sense of stillness that followed. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, unstoppable. Instead, I felt calm, almost at peace. Maybe revenge isn't about punishment. Maybe it's about rediscovering who you are when pain no longer defines you. Still, I wasn't naive enough to think the story was over. Life had a way of testing lessons learned. and Jackson wasn't done trying to reach out. One evening, I received an email, not from him directly, but from a charity organization. They were hosting a fundraising gala and requested me as their keynote speaker. Attached was the sponsor list. His name was there? For a moment, I almost declined, but something told me this encounter would be different. When the night came, I wore a simple black gown, elegant, unassuming, and walked into that ballroom with my head high. Jackson was already there, standing near the entrance alone. He looked older somehow, not just in appearance but in spirit. When our eyes met, he smiled faintly, not with arrogance but with humility. After my speech, which centered on resilience and transformation, he approached me quietly. "You were right," he said softly. "It wasn't revenge. It was balance. And maybe it's what I needed to see." His words didn't sting anymore. They didn't matter in the way they once did. I nodded and replied, "We both learned something then." He smiled sadly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You learned to rise, and I learned to fall." That night, as I left the gala, a cool breeze brushed against my skin, and for the first time in years, I felt completely free. Not from him, but from the version of myself who had once needed his validation. I had taken it all back: my power, my peace, my sense of self. Revenge had transformed into redemption, and redemption had turned into peace. And maybe that's what life was really about, not winning over others, but finding harmony within your own story. The weeks after the gala unfolded like the quiet after a storm. I thought peace would feel like joy, like the sun breaking through clouds after a long, violent night. But it wasn't that. It was a strange stillness, heavy and quiet, like standing in a room where every echo had finally settled. My company continued to grow, my name appeared in articles, my designs were celebrated, yet each success felt slightly hollow. I told myself it was exhaustion, that I just needed rest, but deep down, I knew it was something deeper. Revenge, even in its most poetic form, left traces. You don't walk through fire without carrying the scent of smoke. One evening, as I sat by my apartment window, watching the city lights flicker against the glass, my reflection looked unfamiliar. I had become stronger, wiser, but also colder. The part of me that once laughed freely, loved recklessly, dreamed softly, she was gone. I whispered to the night, was it worth it? But the only answer was silence. I had won, yes, but I wasn't sure what victory meant anymore. A week later, I received a message that shook me in ways I didn't expect. It was from Jackson's sister, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Her words were brief. "He's not well. He's asked for you." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. My first instinct was to delete the message, to pretend I never saw it. But curiosity, or maybe compassion, wouldn't let me. A few days later, I found myself standing outside a small hospital on the outskirts of the city. I told myself I was there for closure, nothing more. When I walked into his room, I barely recognized him. The confident man who once owned every room was now frail, quiet, and tired. His eyes met mine with a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. "You came," he murmured. I nodded silently. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with years of unspoken words. Then he said softly, "I ruined everything I touched. Isla, and for the first time, I see it clearly." He told me about Lydia leaving, about the bankruptcy, the lawsuits, the endless apologies that came too late. But he didn't sound bitter, just empty. "I thought I was building an empire," he said weakly, "but I was just building walls around my own heart." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to remind him of everything he'd done, every lie, every betrayal. But standing there, I realized something. He was already living the consequence of his choices. I didn't need to say a word. When he reached out his hand, I hesitated, then placed mine over his. His skin was cold, fragile, like holding a ghost of the man I once loved. He smiled faintly. "You were always the better one, Isla. I just wasn't strong enough to see it." Tears stung my eyes, not from pity, but from an ache I thought I'd buried long ago. "No, Jackson," I whispered. "I wasn't better. I just learned to heal faster." He closed his eyes, a quiet sigh leaving his lips. For a moment, he looked peaceful, as though he'd finally laid down a burden he'd carried for too long. When I left that hospital room, I didn't look back. I walked through the cold evening air, feeling something shift inside me, a release perhaps. The revenge that had once fueled me had melted into something purer, forgiveness. Not for him, but for myself. I had been carrying his shadow for too long, letting it shape who I became. That night, I went home, lit a candle, and wrote a letter I never intended to send. It began with, "To the woman I used to be," and ended with, "You are free now." As the flame burned lower, I watched the paper curl and turn to ash, and with it, the last remnants of bitterness faded away. Weeks passed, and life began to feel lighter. I traveled, met new people, took on projects that spoke to my soul rather than my ambition. My art changed too. It became softer, more human, filled with emotion rather than perfection. People noticed the shift, calling it maturity or depth, but only I knew it was the result of finally letting go. I wasn't chasing victory anymore. I was embracing peace. One evening, while walking through the park, I saw a couple laughing together under a street lamp. For a moment, I envied them, that kind of innocent trust. Then I smiled, realizing I didn't need it anymore. I had found something rarer, clarity. Love would return someday, I knew, but it would find me whole, not wounded. And then one morning, as I prepared for a new exhibition, I received a small package with no name on it. Inside was a sketchbook, my old one. The one I had thought was lost years ago. On the first page, written in Jackson's handwriting, were 3 simple words. "You won, Isla." I sat there for a long time, staring at those words, feeling a strange mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Winning had never been the goal. It was about finding myself again. But somehow those words felt like a full circle. Life had a way of completing its own stories, even the painful ones. I closed the book gently, placed it on the shelf, and whispered to the quiet morning, "No." "Jackson, we both did." For the first time, I meant it. When Isla woke the next morning, sunlight spilled gently through the sheer curtains, scattering gold across the polished floors. But the warmth in her chest wasn't from the light. It was from peace. True peace. For the first time in years, she felt no bitterness, no ache, no invisible weight clinging to her ribs. Jackson was gone. His empire, built on deceit, manipulation, and stolen trust, was nothing more than ash in the wind. The board had voted him out after Isla's revelations. The world saw him for what he truly was, and his charm could no longer save him. Yet Isla didn't rejoice in his destruction. Her victory was quieter, deeper. It lived in the way her hands no longer trembled, in the calm rhythm of her breath. She'd faced the monster that once ruled her life and walked away not as prey but as power. Weeks later, she returned to the place where it had all begun, the small cafe on the corner of Holloway Street. The same one where she and Jackson had met years ago when she was still a dreamer with paint-stained hands and a heart that believed too easily. Now she sat by the window with a notebook open, sketching again. Not for escape this time, but for herself. Her art, once a silent cry for freedom, had become her voice, raw, strong, and unapologetic. People began to notice her work, not because of the man who once stood beside her, but because of the woman who now stood tall on her own. One afternoon, while Isla displayed her paintings at a small local exhibit, she saw a familiar figure lingering near the entrance. Jackson, thinner, defeated, dressed plainly in contrast to his once polished arrogance. Their eyes met. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with memories and words that would never be spoken. He approached slowly, as if still trying to summon the confidence that used to command rooms. "You destroyed everything," he muttered bitterly. But his voice wavered, no longer powerful. Isla smiled softly, not cruelly, but with the serenity of someone who had long moved on. "No, Jackson," she said, her voice calm as still water. You did. I just stopped pretending it was beautiful. She turned back to her canvas, her brush moving with ease, and he stood there a moment longer before leaving, just another shadow fading from her story. Months passed, and Isla's life blossomed in quiet, meaningful ways. Her gallery expanded. Her art gained recognition across the country. Yet she remained grounded, often visiting her mother's grave, the one person who'd believed in her even when she couldn't. "I did it, Mum," she whispered one crisp autumn morning. "I finally let go." The wind seemed to answer, carrying a soft rustle through the trees as if in approval. She closed her eyes, smiling through tears. That evening, she held her first solo art exhibition in London. The room was filled with people, critics, collectors, artists, dreamers. At the center of the gallery stood her masterpiece, a painting titled The Rise. It depicted a woman standing amidst a crumbling city, flames behind her, dawn before her, her expression calm, unbroken. The crowd stood in silent awe. Isla didn't need to explain the meaning. It was her life, every scar, every betrayal, every silent scream transformed into something breathtaking. After the event, as the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Isla stood by the window overlooking the city skyline. The night air was cool, carrying the hum of distant laughter and traffic. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "I'm free." For the first time, the words didn't feel like hope. They felt like truth. She wasn't the woman who needed to prove her worth or fight for love that never fought back. She was the woman who rebuilt herself from ashes and found beauty in every crack. As the camera fades out on Isla's silhouette against the city lights, her voice echoes softly, reflective, powerful, full of quiet triumph. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. Don't fear the fall. It's how you learn to rise.